Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from Ocean Exchange and from our colleagues at the Marine Technology Society. We're very happy to have our November webcast about fisheries and aquaculture. And I think it's a topic that no one honestly gets tired of listening to. And there are a lot of innovation and a lot of things going on in this area. And it's one of the key areas for the blue economy. Millicent Pitts, I'm Executive Director of Ocean Exchange. We're just coming off of our 10th anniversary event in Florida. I have to give a little commercial. Go to oceanexchange.org/winners/ to see who won. We had a $245,000 cash purse that we're giving away. Ocean Exchange, if this is your first encounter with us, is a nonprofit. We have one mission, that's to help advance the adoption of innovative solutions for healthy oceans, resilient coastal systems, and we also have some particular focus on zero emissions and decarbonization of ocean shipping. And if you look at our winners and look at those awards, you'll see that focus. We are privately funded. You saw many of our key sponsors on that first slide, and you can go to oceanexchange.org to see everyone else. In our 10-year history now, we've broken the $2 million mark of non-dilutive funds we've given out. We reach startups in that critical TRL kind of 6, 7, and 8 typically, when they're they're eating cans of pork and beans trying to survive. They get different kinds of grants. They're piecing together all kinds of money, and our non-dilutive funds are very, very important. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over now to Zinka Willis of the Marine Technology Society.
Great. Good morning to everybody. Millie, thank you. So glad to be with you again, and congratulations to you on your successful competition. So for those of you who are not familiar with MTS, we were established in 1963 on the premise that it's important to foster advances in marine science and technology that benefits humankind and contributes to the sustainability of planet Earth. We have individual, corporate, and institutional members in 20 countries. MTS connects to our members through professional committees and sections. Our sections include geographic sections, an early career ocean professional section, and student sections. So we, in 2021, held our first in-person event, both virtual and in-person in San Diego. And in 2022, we're looking for our full slate of events to be in-person, with many of them with a virtual component. The first one up in 2022 is Oceans 2022 in Chennai, India in February, and the Oceans in Action Port Security in Mississippi in March. So we hope that you will join us either in person or virtually. I say that MTS is a catalyst, and I want to highlight our new Chartered Marine Technology Certification Program. Please go to the MTS website for information on how you can apply. We also embrace communications to advocate for the importance of marine technology. We're a partner organization of the United Nations Oceans Decade, and I draw your attention to our June issue of our MTS journal, which is focused on the decade. That journal is open to all, so again, please go to our website and download that. So this is a very timely and important conversation. So Dane, let me turn it over to you for another exciting panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Zinka, and it is an exciting panel. Great to have everybody here. We have a number of people on the webcast who were with us in Florida a week before last for the Ocean Exchange. And we did something new this year. Along with the Ocean Exchange, we had a decarbonization summit. We brought together top executives in the world's shipping industry from all over the US and Europe. From ports, some of the biggest shippers represented, fuel suppliers, all sorts of people with an interest in decarbonizing the shipping industry. We took a real deep dive into how to look at long and short-term carbon problems in there and how we could change the structure of shipping. As you know, it's been in the news a lot with what's happening at the ports. what's happening at the ports has actually increased, this doesn't get told a lot, but it's increased emissions around the ports. It's been a big problem for port communities to manage everything that they're doing. And because the world's ocean shipping takes 3%, nearly 3% of the carbon footprint of Earth, that's a big thing to fix. So worked on that. But here's one of the surprising things that came out of it that really struck me as we were working. When we talked about short-term solutions, the most obvious low-hanging fruits were two things. One was public awareness. If you could, for instance, go to Amazon or any site that you order things from, what if there was an option to have the greener delivery? Sure, you can get the overnight if you need it, but what if you could wait a week and it would be 30% less carbon footprint in that form of delivery? Would the public go for that? I think a lot of people would, and I think that would help the shippers and everybody fix that. So that came out as a pretty easy thing we could do right now. We don't have to reinvent ship engines. The other thing that came out, and everybody was involved in this already, was the use of data to reduce carbon usage. Lot of work has been done in the ports. We've participated in some of it at Reservoir in helping to see if you automated, if you did AI, if you just got better at data in the ports. We saw that you could reduce the number of trucks needed on the ground by about 12%. That's not huge, but it's significant. Same with the use of data crossing the oceans. So data is really, really, again, another low-hanging fruit that makes it really easy to solve problems that we want to solve. And that's true almost anywhere. Aviations, cars, building management, kitchen management, how to cook food in big restaurants. More data you have, the better that you can be and the less effect you'll have on the environment. But the most useful may be in the blue economy. When you look at the number of things that we can do with ocean data, it gets really to be an interesting conversation. So today, you're going to meet two experts in aquaculture and in using technology to improve the production, particularly in this case, of fisheries. Christian Braden of the Marine Aquaculture Association, or the Maine Aquaculture Association, is with us, and a former Ocean Exchange finalist and somebody we've had on the webcast before, Courtney Opshog from the Blue Ocean Gear Company. I'm going to talk about what they're doing. So a couple of things. If you have questions, don't put them in the chat, put them in the question section that you see over on the right. There are, by the way, a couple of handouts, both from Courtney and Christian, so if you want to follow up more, you can download those. And finally, if we get into some really technical questions, we will hold those until after the webcast, and you can stay on and we'll address them then. But because most of our audience is general business and academic people, not everybody is deeply technical. So we'll address those. So Christian, let me hand over to you and tell us what you're doing at the Maine Aquaculture Association.
Yeah, thanks, Dane. Glad to do that. So over the Maine Aquaculture Association, just to give a little background on, our association as a whole, we are the oldest state aquaculture organization in the country, founded in 1976, and we're a membership-based organization. So we're not state-run or anything like that. We represent the sector at large. It's a nonprofit trade association, and it's looking at the local, state, national, even international level. Both myself and our executive director, Sebastian Bell, does a lot of work all across the board, really. Again, representing every aspect of aquaculture, really, meaning we're not just tied to maybe those even within Maine. For some of the background of myself, there we go, the first slide. For some of the background of myself, I come from an aquaculture economics angle. And so that's a lot of the work we've been doing, business planning, things of that nature, benchmarking, production planning, best management practices, marketing, consumer preferences, workforce development. I mean, it runs the whole gamut of pretty much everything that can be done. My title, as you can see here, is a project manager. So part of it is whatever projects that the sector are requesting is pretty much what we take on, along with our outreach and communications, Afton Hupper, who does a lot around, I would call it messaging and really a lot of the outreach work. creating videos, social media content, really trying to spread the word about what aquaculture is, what it isn't, what it looks like, where it's going on, who's doing it, all those sorts of messages in general. But to jump into this a little more specifically, I would like to talk about aquaculture in America. And just for, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with this and some probably not so much. So I figure I'll start at a bigger picture and narrow it down a little bit. So next slide, please. An overview of aquaculture is just really growing any sort of species in an aquatic medium. Here, for example, you can see someone growing, well, they grow scallops and oysters. I can't tell in that picture. I think it's oysters, but growing them in a river, off the coast, something like that, in a marine environment. However, it does also occur oftentimes in a land-based setting, whether that be, high in the mountains, to say at state-run trout hatchery, or in some of these newer recirculating aquaculture systems on land for salmon in the US. But across the world, it takes a variety of different forms, not only what people are growing, but how they're growing them. But in the US, it's a diverse sector. There are many different sizes of operations and species being grown. We're seeing a lot with salmon. There's very strong demand for that across the country and worldwide, quite frankly, but especially for us, we've seen a lot more of shellfish aquaculture. So oysters, especially mussels, scallops. Those are two newer ones, but there's that, and seaweed as well has been growing across the US, especially more in the northern regions where you have a bit colder water. Aquaculture provides high quality, sustainable seafood. It's really looking at, local seafood. A lot of seafood, as we all know, I'm sure here, can get exported. There's the discrepancy between the imports and the exports and deficit. And what this really does is bring high quality seafood, sustainably grown to very, very strict standards. We have some of the strictest standards in the world to which aquaculture occurs, and the standards by which the animals are raised and harvested. So it really feeds right into, quite literally, the local food system, but also across the country. And of course, there's some exports as well. It also really big thing here, especially in a place like Maine, where we do have a working waterfront, agriculture and fishing traditions. It really checks all of those boxes. It's sort of a hybrid of all three of those. It's keeping jobs on the working waterfront as we see differences in, say, how fisheries have looked traditionally, but also ties into the agricultural tradition too, as someone is, the husbandry is a huge factor here, raising these animals until a market size. The blue economy jobs I have here, and this is looking at a little over a $5 billion impact, economic impact of aquaculture in the US. It's growing. I'm not exactly sure what year that number's from. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but it has been growing since then. But also just something really tying to here, aquaculture has been going on for over 1,000 years. It depends on who you ask exactly. So it's not like it's a brand new thing either. It is newer to the US, and a lot of the methods are being currently tried and really seeing what works best in all aspects, socially, economically, environmentally. And in terms of when I was talking earlier about the diversity of the sector, the sizes can range from some people who grow, say, a couple hundred oysters essentially in their backyard, in the water. And then you have some multi-million-dollar, say, could be a land-based organization, for example, something like that, or even these state-run hatcheries can be very sizable. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges we have in aquaculture, no surprise, working in a marine environment, climate change is one that we see for sure. That's looking at, increasing the temperatures of the water, which can, say, especially in some regions that didn't have issues with it before, bring certain diseases, harmful algal bloom, so on and so forth with it. The access to capital is also an issue we see as well. That's really one of the biggest issues we see right now, because historically aquaculture doesn't have a lot of the records that other places may or other sectors may. So some are a little reluctant at first, and that's why organizations such as these included today can really have a monumental impact in some of the technology that's being tested out, because there is so much being tested out. And as I have here, scalable technologies, that is a huge challenge just because it is new, and even a lot of these technologies that are being used haven't really thoroughly been tested yet, just because they're new. They're essentially cutting edge. Sometimes they're borrowing from other traditions, say, or other sectors, say agriculture, manufacturing, or whatever it may be in terms of processing. there's a lot that can be done, and people are constantly innovating. Some of the things that have even happened from 10 years ago to now in Maine, for example, have just essentially turned on their heads. So there are, we joke there's no John Deere of the ocean quite yet. So the technology is still emerging, and data pretty limited on all of this too. So there's a ton to be done there, and no doubt access to capital and financing are huge aspects of how some of this can be done. Some of it just, quite frankly, without it can't be done, or can't be done at scale. So it's really important that that is addressed. Risk management and limited history both factor into that access to capital as well. They're challenges because there are not a ton of risk management options now. We are working on it, but at a national level and beyond, but there just historically hasn't been a ton there because it's still a relatively newer sector. And that's where the limited history comes in as well. So again, people are a little bit more reluctant to invest in aquaculture for that exact reason. Yeah, next slide, please. So what's next? Again, I know scalable technologies, I keep repeating that because we cannot, again, emphasize how much of a difference that can make. There's a picture right here of someone flipping an oyster cage, which, as you can imagine, trying to flip a several 100-pound thing that's below your knees over on a wet, cold surface could go wrong in just about a million different ways. So this is just one picture of seeing what someone's trying to do and how a technology could really revolutionize this entire sector in terms of safety, risk for not only the operators and the labor, but also just making it more efficient. So that can be done on so many different fronts in aquaculture, I can't even begin to count them. Other ideas on what's next, hatcheries, again, investment's a pretty large part here. We get into the, I guess in this context, more of a fish or the egg problem. It's difficult for people to invest in hatcheries before there's really any proven market for the fish or any sort of proven technologies that this fish can be done in a hatchery. So it's one of these, which comes first, the money or the hatchery. And if there are, especially say state-run hatcheries or private hatcheries for that matter, that allow people to work on maybe a more innovation-based project, that can have a monumental impact in what they're allowed to do. For example, they could work on a very small scale, prove that they're able to spawn these certain fish, and do that on a larger scale, and that can be what's kicking off, an incubator as a business. That can go a very long way. Other things that are next for us is looking at benchmarking and financing. This is some work we've done in Maine. As far as I know, I believe it's the first in the country that's been done on a statewide level. Benchmarking is a huge part of the financing, helping both those who are looking to invest or lend and those on the growing side understand what a farm looks like, what are expenses, what are startup costs, all these different structures that we see in traditional, say, agriculture or other more industrialized sectors, perhaps, giving really some standards to the industry as a whole. Science-based messaging is also huge. There's a lot out there about aquaculture that is not entirely true. It's unfortunate that it gets out there, and this is not news to anyone who works, especially anything marine. There of course are concerns. There's no doubt about that, but it's really important to understand what's happening, say in the U.S. versus say other parts of the world, and understanding what the truth is. So a big part is really getting out the word about aquaculture and just being there to answer people's questions, and even forums like this just to discuss aquaculture. Offshore is probably the last possible next step on here. We're looking for some streamlined, say, legislation to move through on this and really pave the way for the availability of offshore aquaculture to take place. But there are several steps before we get there. But for now, I believe that is about my time, so I will pass it over to Courtney.
Thanks so much, Christian.
Courtney, great to have you back. You've got a great story to tell, and we've heard it a couple of times, both at Ocean Exchange and here on the webcast a year ago. Why don't you walk us through what you're doing and tell us how you're solving some of the problems that Christian just brought up?
Absolutely. I can start going through my slides, Alice, if you want to go to the next one. Thanks. So I'm Courtney Opchuk. I'm the CEO of Blue Ocean Gear, and we're providing intelligent connected buoys for commercial fishing fleets and aquaculture to help track gear out on the ocean. Because right now we're not doing that. And some of the impacts can be devastating for both the economy and the environment. I'll start a little bit with about our company. We are based in Northern California, so we are Silicon Valley nerds, but everyone has strong ties to the ocean and a deep commitment to improving ocean health. We were founded in 2015 based on the belief that we can use technology to create a bridge between conservation and the fishing industry, as well as aquaculture, and provide ways to make the industry more sustainable. And we've been growing with our product line even throughout the past several years, especially as the seafood industry has started to recover from the pandemic. They were hit very strongly. Alice, can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide. Thanks. So the driving reason that we set out on this path was to prevent gear loss. An estimated 640,000 metric tons of fishing gear are lost in our oceans every year around the globe. And this gear continues to fish without ever being harvested. And everything that's captured dies and becomes bait for more fish to become captured. And so this is the cycle known as ghost fishing, and it can deplete fishery stocks and be very detrimental to the marine ecosystems. And in fact, they estimate that it's up to about 30% of our world fishery stocks are affected by ghost fishing. And in addition to this, it becomes unlimited competition for the fishermen. So beyond just paying to replace the gear that they've lost, they're now actually harvesting less as well. There's a very significant impact to their bottom line. Plus, they're spending time and fuel going out and searching for gear because it's a wide open ocean. You don't know if your gear is lost until you've actually really, it moves, anyway as they're going out hauling gear. And in addition, lost fishing gear is actually one of the leading causes or components of ocean plastic pollution. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the first thing we did was work with fishermen, go out with commercial fishermen and aquaculture farms, really understand what their operations are and understand how to design technology that could work with their operations and not have any sort of impact or negative impact. These folks are working at such a very high duty cycle. They just having extra time in the day just doesn't happen. And so anything that we had to design to work with them really had to be seamless and also work in such rugged conditions. I think designing for the marine environment is already challenging enough. Designing for the fishing industry and aquaculture industry is that much harder because they are so tough on gear and it's under such incredibly tough conditions. So let's go on to the next slide, please. So we've developed our smart buoy systems. These are GPS tracking buoys that attach to a fisherman's main gear and send position information to the ubiquitous cloud so that it can be displayed on either a mobile app or a website. And what this does is it gives fishermen a superpower, right? Like they can now see, where their gear is at all times, and they get an alert if something's gone wrong, like it's moved too far beyond a certain threshold. And after working in partnership with many commercial fishermen, the buoys have been designed to be incredibly rugged, depth rated because a lot of their gear gets dragged underwater because of strong conditions. Nothing that could easily break off. And so we really came up with a design that was compatible with many different gear configurations, including traps, long lines, nets, as well as aquaculture pens. Next slide, please. Is what we found is that fishers not only need to know where their gear is, but they want to know what's going on, because that actually drives their response and their operations. Was their gear dragged away by another trawler coming through? So gear conflict issues. Was it washed away by a storm? Was gear entangled by a marine mammal? Or did it just get dragged under by strong currents and tides and will resurface later? These are all conditions that happen quite often with fixed fishing gear, and the fishermen really needed to know. So we actually have a very specific suite of sensors that are on board the buoys that can actually help, that data can be interpreted to provide the likelihood of any of these events happening, and really give the fishermen a better understanding of what's going on out on the water, help them operate that much more efficiently. It really comes down to ocean businesses needing data, and this is the kind of data that they need just for their daily operations. Next slide, please. So at this point, we've been running pilots and opening up our market to various fixed gear fisheries and aquaculture farms, mainly in North America, though we're starting to expand a little bit beyond that as well. Primarily in a lot of the North Atlantic and Alaskan fisheries, but there's growing interest from aquaculture, and Christian mentioned that seaweed and kelp farms are becoming more prevalent, and we're actually getting engaged in that as well. And we're also about to have buoys deployed on fishing aggregate devices in the South Pacific. So I think what we're seeing is that as the Marine Stewardship Council starts to consider things like ghost gear and marine mammal interactions, and the Global Ghost Gear Initiative best practices are becoming more widely spread, the smart buoys are really finding their place in various fisheries as we move forward. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So our vision for the future is really, it's quite simple. We'd like to use fishing gear, which is already out on the water in large, vast numbers, to collect data that's useful for both the fishing industry and beyond. And in doing so, we can start to reduce ghost fishing, marine plastic, debris, but also help fishermen, run their businesses more efficiently and more sustainably. I think that's all I had. So thanks very much for your time.
We're going to see if Dane is on. He lost his internet, so I'm going to have to wing it if he doesn't get on. Hopefully he can call in. So I'll ask a couple of questions, but I ask that the people in the audience start putting their questions in the question box, not the chat box, please. And I'm sure you have a lot of questions here. And Alice, if you see any questions in chat, can you move them up into questions? So Courtney, I know that we know you a couple of years now. Yeah, actually maybe 2.5 years. Tell us about your fundraising. Who actually, so get into the business model part of who actually pays for this, what you're actually selling. Are there products and service, product only service? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure, absolutely. So the way that our business model or our business is set up is to provide we sell the hardware to, and our customers tend to be either individual fishermen or aquaculture farm management or vessel owners. But then there's also an annual subscription fee for the data that's coming in. And so, and the economics do work out over, as when compared to how much fuel they're saving, the amount of gear that they typically would lose in a season, as well as the reduced harvest from ghost fishing, the ROI is definitely there. In terms of fundraising, I think Millie, back when we were in the Ocean Exchange a few years ago, we were starting out with I think typical to many startups, working with grant funding and small investments, and then did a few accelerator programs. I think we've been very fortunate to have seen the ocean accelerator world just grow, and the ecosystem is just fantastic now. There's a lot of different options and support for working in the ocean tech and related businesses. And so we were able to take advantage of that. And then we actually just closed our first price round earlier this year. And so it's been, so we're seeing a lot more interest in oceans and developing technology that can help get, especially around ocean data. And so I think having fisheries and aquaculture be part of that, I think people are seeing a lot of the growth that Christian talked about, and there's a lot of potential there. And I think that that it's investors are starting to see that as a viable business, and I think the customers are really starting to understand that they can operate businesses more successfully if they start to use some of the new technology that's coming out.
Good. I see that as well. A real sea change, no pun intended. Christian, I want to ask you one question, then I'm going to get to some questions from the audience, and hopefully Dane will get in. Dane, I promise I'm not trying to take your job. Christian, if you had a meeting of your members and I was a fly on the wall, what would be the one major pain point that they have that they would want people, entrepreneurs like Courtney? I mean, you talked about innovation. What is the biggest pain point that you hear from your membership?
In terms of an innovation perspective or
Yes.
otherwise?
Well, anything that could be solved, right? But more innovation, not policy. Talk about innovation first.
Okay, yeah, I would say one big thing, especially looking at oyster farms specifically, would be looking at ways to say really try to make it more efficient of a process. And that goes for mussels as well. For oysters especially, it could be things like ways to flip bags easier, or really anything that would make it simpler to operate, with fewer people essentially on more scale. Maine's farms in general are very small by international standards. They're like microscopic. But even still, it's hard for one person to do a lot of this work. So really trying to maximize the amount of labor, and the safety being a huge part of that as well. So I'd say that really goes for, quite frankly, all three of them. Just throughout the production process, just keeping things as streamlined as possible, and any technologies that help with that can go a very long way.
Okay, well, we're going to take some questions from the audience. I'll read them. This one I think is for you, Courtney. Can you talk about the cost of your smart buoy?
Sure, and honestly, the cost for the hardware is very dependent on the configuration. We have a couple different flavors of the buoys. Some of them are transmit data via satellite, some transmit via radio, and that impacts the cost. But we have the ability to work with smaller fishing setups and gear configurations, as well as some of the larger ones. And so there's there's quite a range, I guess, with how we work with it. So we usually work individually with the customer to determine what that best configuration and what the most cost-effective setup would be for them.
Good. So very customized that way. I like that. Here's a question from Mike Blumenberg, and I apologize if I don't pronounce people's names right. Is there a California equivalent to the Maine Aquaculture Association? And even answer that more broadly, are there many state aquaculture associations? Is there a national aquaculture association? Christian, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. There are many state aquaculture organizations. Some are more official than others. Some are sort of a loose collection. Some are formalized. We have only 3 people right now. We have typically 4. It's not like we're a huge operation, but across the country there are others as well. In many coastal states, at least, there is an East Coast Shellfish Growers Association. I believe there's one on the West Coast too, and there is a National Aquaculture Association as well. But regardless, we, not only from Maine, but it's a relatively tight-knit network, so most people are working across state lines all the time. And I wish I could speak specifically to know if California did have one. I believe they do, but I'm not positive. But if not, I know we have worked with people from California on many related issues as well.
Courtney, do you know that by any chance?
I don't know offhand if there's a California Aquaculture Association similar to the Maine one, but there are quite a few aquaculture inshore farms.
Okay, we have a question from Kathy Sakas, who's one of the Ocean Exchange board members, by the way. Thank you, Kathy. And this is for both of you. It says, what are your information strategies to get community buy-in and engagement?
I'll let you
Courtney,
go first, Courtney.
Sure.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, no, I think that, there's a few different ways. I think we've just started, in terms of reaching the fishing community, a lot of it is through marketing, through, to some of the typical publications for the industry. A lot of it too is word of mouth. As we've grown, there's been a lot of organic growth, I think, between our communication amongst some of the fishers. But I think also there's been, like I said, there's a lot of press attention right now on ghost gear as well as marine mammal entanglements, and so we've been, engaged in that as well, or engaged in some of that outreach.
Christian, how do you get information out?
For us, Maine being a somewhat small state, we often can do it in sort of traditional ways, whether it's getting information out. I would say it's, we have social media, of course, emails, things like that. And in terms of how we're often obtaining that information, we typically go for a very grassroots approach, and I spend a lot of my time speaking one-on-one or in small groups with growers. So, trying to learn from the ground up really what's going on, what people are looking for, issues, successes, so on and so forth, sharing that broadly. But yeah, predominantly I would say newsletters, social media, emails. Sometimes if we really need something, urgently, or really need to get information out, we'll just start calling people.
Christian, you mentioned in some of your earlier comments that you engage outside of Maine as well. So how do you do that? How does Maine collaborate or communicate outside of Maine?
Well, right now, on the more formal side of it, our executive director, Sebastian Bell, is, I believe, the vice president of the National Aquaculture Association, or vice president of the board, I believe. So he works on that front. I work on a lot of collaborative projects across the country, really. A lot of the times it's different ways people see work going on in different sections of the country. Say, for example, I see something that we are trying to do, but someone in Maryland is already working on it. I'll reach out, we'll work with them, say around business planning, for example, something like that. And at the more national level, I would say there really is a mentality of we're all in this together, whether it's East Coast, nationally, whatever it may be, because in many cases, if something happens in one state, that could become the precedent for another. So we're really working very closely with everyone all the time, especially around policy, and with individual projects as well. I'm trying to help, bolster different sections of aquaculture across state lines, regions, and so on.
Okay, let's take another one here. There seem to be several questions, and I'm getting some good text from my colleagues here about getting funding for investments for the small operators. Are there any groups, Courtney or Christian, either one of you can answer this, that help those that maybe have poor access to capital and operating funds to do more innovative things? Are there state pools of funds? Is there philanthropy that can help the small operators? Any source of funds? Courtney, you go first.
Yeah. Well, Maine is actually one place that does have a couple, at least I know for aquaculture in particular, available. And I think there are various government grants. We've actually worked with in Canada quite a bit. There's some available funding for fishermen and aquaculture farms to try out new alternative technologies to help improve businesses. We all, in some, let's see, we've also worked with the Global Ghost Gear Initiative on some of the smaller communities to get technology in places that it could really benefit, whereas they may not otherwise been able to afford it. I don't know, Christian, if you know of other organizations.
Yeah, in Maine, we have several offhand I can think of. The Maine Technology Institute has really diversified their portfolio into aquaculture quite heavily over the past few years. It's been a big switch into investing in aquaculture and seeing the potential I mean, in that sense, strictly the economic potential it has for the state of Maine. Even in some cases, that it leaves the water cleaner than it started sometimes. Coastal Enterprises Incorporated that's a smaller one in Maine. They work traditionally with fishermen, but also aquaculture. There is at the federal level, say, I think what you just referenced, Courtney, the Small Business Innovation Research. I was messing up my acronyms. They do that as well. And I do know several people have worked, maybe less on the innovation side, but with the Farm Service Agency as well for financing. I think it's micro loans, I believe they're doing through them. So it all depends. And I think I'm forgetting another one right now in terms of innovation. But we do have the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center as well. And they'll sometimes put out calls for grants proposals. And at the very least, they are an incubator for oftentimes technology-focused aquaculture businesses.
That's great. What we see across the board, whether they're existing small operators or they're innovators, they have to piece together all sorts of funds, to get going. And there's just no one big pot of money that's going to solve all the problems. And it's good that all these sources exist. It's complicated for the parties that have to piece it together, but I think that's the world we're in right now. Now we called it blended finance, right? We have a fancy name for it, but it's what entrepreneurs, I think, have done for a long time. When at Ocean Exchange in Florida last week, we had a collegiate team that competed. And they were looking at combining aquaculture with future or existing wind farms. Christian, I'll toss this to you, and Courtney, if you have any opinion or any comments, please chime in when Christian's done.
Yeah, I've heard of that in theory. I don't know how rigorously it's been tested yet. The hypothetical, I know economic and production experiments have gone on. I don't know if it's really been physically tested yet, and I wish I had more information on that. But yeah, hypothetically, it definitely seems to, the infrastructure is there and people are going out. It provides a very good opportunity to have a place where aquaculture can be grown and completely out of everybody else's way, because there's already the infrastructure there, and it will be located, within that. And the habitat benefits and such are included as well. But yeah, I'll spare everyone diving into the weeds on that.
Any comment, Courtney?
Yeah, I think anytime that we can find ways where we can have, the circular economy and involved and have energy generated to help run farms as well. That's definitely worth exploring. I think some of the, obviously it needs a lot of environmental impact assessment for things like that. And I think even just for farmers by themselves and for aquaculture farms as well as wind farms separately, it can be really challenging. And so to combine them, I bet that's even more challenging, but certainly worth looking into.
So this one, I'll come back to you, Courtney. It's from Tobias Dewhurst. And Dane started talking about data. And so this one is about data. What data types your buoys presently can output? GPS, anything else? And what, if any, data streams do you plan to add in the future? So if you can talk about data output.
Sure, that's a great question. So right now we do have GPS that gives us position, but we do also have acceleration, depth, and temperature. Temperature is the one that we have a lot of interest in, particularly from aquaculture farms. It can be used to, they use that information in fisheries as well, but particularly in farms, they're using it to really drive their operations and when they're raising and lowering their strings, when they're timing their harvest and things like that. We do plan to add additional sensors in the future as I think now that folks are seeing the buoys in action more and more, like, well, what about this? Could you add this? So we're kind of getting a lot of inquiries for different sensors that we can add. A lot of it will be around ocean conditions because that information is useful, not just for the fishing industry, but for other ocean industries as well.
For those of you, I guess you can all see the questions. There's a response about 30 plus national, regional, and state and species aquaculture associations. So there's a little bit more information in there. So let's see another question here as I'm scrolling through this. Excuse me. This is Dane does a great job on this, not me. There's something about, Courtney, a question if you're working or could work in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes, we'd be very interested in working in the Gulf of Mexico. There's quite a few fisheries there that I think could be that could benefit from this, trap fisheries, but also they do some deep set buoys fishing for swordfish, which we've actually just started working with sword fishing in California using deep set buoys. And so there's definitely a lot of interest there. There's a lot of volatile weather there as well. We see a lot of, anytime you have hurricane regions come through there, there's usually typically a lot of gear loss. Hundreds of thousands of traps go missing in a single storm. And then how do you get them all back? How do you prevent all of that gear from ghost fishing again? So we've also just deployed in the Caribbean for similar reasons. It's one of the most volatile areas in terms of weather conditions.
Cool. Okay, so we're at the 45-minute mark. Alice, why don't you bring us to our closeout slides? And I don't think that we have any more questions that we have to address at the end, but there's apparently the National Association of Aquaculture. Maybe I didn't get that term exactly right, but you can Google it. Sounds like they have a lot of information. Paul posted here. He's with that organization. I encourage you to maybe look them up or contact Christian if you have more specific questions about aquaculture. So we lost Dane. It's the first time in a year and a half that he lost his internet. I guess Wimberley it's a little slice of heaven, but it's not always perfect. And he'll be with us again. Dane does this for us online, and he was the moderator of our event. He does it pro bono for us. He's a terrific guy. He's the founding partner of Reservoir Inc., and they do a lot of leadership development work and work with leadership groups about their strategies and how they work together. Next slide. Anyway, thank you all for participating. We've been doing these every Wednesday. We have one coming up in December, and in the handouts, there's a flyer just hot off the press about that. And we will talk about materials from the sea, particularly pharma from the sea, December 1, 11 a.m. Eastern. I hope you tune in. Here's some more coordinates for us. Next slide. Send us your feedback. You see a summary of Zdenka's comments. You see some of our key sponsors, and we couldn't do this without them. Next slide. And we couldn't do all of this, we lost that, without our behind the scenes people. So we have Alice, Monica, Christina, and others at the MTS that support this. We do have a webcast library. I know that MTS also curates these. Because we're competing with COP26, all kinds of stuff, we're really going to blast this link out. I also want to give a shout out to Liesl Hodling, who I think is tuned in today. She was on our Shark Tank at Ocean Exchange in Florida. Our Shark Tank is our collegiate award, and we thank her, and we really appreciate the collaboration with MTS. And thank you all very much, and we'll sign out at this point. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you.